is not feeling well. We're having a little trouble here with the microphone. We call him Bhakta Mike. So we're continuing with the reading of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, written by His Holiness Satsvarup Das Goswami. We're on the foreword to the volume 3. This foreword we started last week. It was written by the Professor Emeritus of the History of Religion's Graduate Theological Union and Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, California. Now this is very important because this very highly placed professor, Dr. J. Stilson Judah, he was there at the Theological School of Religion right in Berkeley, which was right across from San Francisco. And he watched how Srila Prabhupada was able to establish Krishna consciousness in a completely foreign atmosphere. Normally when a great saintly person comes, they preach within their own community of people. They're known to the people, they know the culture, they know the language. This was not the case with Srila Prabhupada. He went to a completely foreign civilization and was able to transplant a completely unknown theological philosophy within a foreign land. So that's why Dr. Judah was very interested in both the philosophy and the personality of Srila Prabhupada. And it was he who studied Krishna consciousness on an academic level. And was able to convince other professors, theologians, police officers, government officers, that Krishna consciousness is a genuine religion. He was very much in favor of Srila Prabhupada and all of the valuable, beyond philanthropic, he saved these youth who Dr. Judah saw were suffering so much in that hippie area of San Francisco. So we're on the last page of his foreword. His weak health led him to return to India and to his Vedic doctors. So we haven't gotten to that part yet. After Srila Prabhupada, now he's been in the country for about a year and a half. He came in September 1965. Now it's January 1967. And he worked nonstop, all alone. Finally, even when he got disciples, he had to work harder because he had to train his disciples. Although they were attempting to help him, they were so new, they knew so little of the philosophy that it became more work for Prabhupada, in whom he showed considerably more faith than in Western medicine. So when Prabhupada finally, when he returned to New York in May of 1967, he suffered a stroke. And after that time, although he was able to recover, we know what it's like here in the summer seasons. So Srila Prabhupada wanted to return to Vrindavan in June and soak up the heat of Vrindavan. He felt that that would help him recover. So thank you. Thank you. And he had seen, because it was an emergency, they had to take him to a hospital because he was having seizure. He saw that the Western doctors, they were actually just trying to experiment on him. They wanted to find out in his brain what was going on. They were taking spinal taps and injecting him with all types of things that he didn't know what it was. So he wanted to come back here, and his doctor, Banamali, he was in Gopinath Bazar, and it was he who treated Prabhupada when he came back. He also treated him in 1977 as well. Still, he was not content to remain in India, and this volume closes with his return to America. After he went to India, Prabhupada, as soon as he was recovered, he came back to America, and to his anxiously waiting disciples. Perhaps more than anything else, this volume reveals those extraordinary personal attributes of Srila Prabhupada that elicited such deep reverence and affection from his disciples. Besides being a man of deep moral strength, humility, and holiness, he was genuinely renounced. Unlike many modern gurus, he was content to live as his disciples did. Even when his health failed and he returned to the blazing heat of Delhi for his recovery, he sought nothing better than a poorly furnished room. That was his room at Radha Damodar Temple. He also stayed at his room at Chippiwada until he was strong enough to come back to Vrindavan. Without air conditioning, well, we didn't even have electricity in Vrindavan until 1962. And even now we still have cutoffs. So it's not that we were able to depend on electricity. At the Prabhupada's Radha Damodar rooms, there was no running water. There was just a well, and we would have to draw water from that well for all of Prabhupada's needs. And Prabhupada also had to do that. He lived so simply. No electricity, no running water, so simply. And this is what Prabhupada came back to for recovery. In a Hindu temple where he had resided before coming to America, Srila Prabhupada's life, as it is revealed here, is the epitome of his ideal, an ideal that he set forth for others to follow. In an age of pervasive hypocrisy and cynicism, it is this kind of rare model that we need. So now we're living in great luxury in our ISKCON temples. But in the early days of ISKCON, we slept on the bare floor, sometimes 20 people in a room, because we just didn't have facilities. But we had so much determination to be Krishna conscious, that we tolerated unspeakable austerities that we wouldn't even want to remember because there was very little money. We would get what we would eat and what we would serve for prasadam. We would go and we would get the rejects from the supermarkets and the vegetable markets, whatever they couldn't sell anymore. We would go in the back to the big garbage bins and take those crates back to the temple and make all those things into prasadam. That's how we lived, because there was very little money. We had very few books. And whatever donations we got on Sankirtan, that's how we lived. And how did we learn to live like that? By the example of Srila Prabhupada, because he lived so simply. So now we're completing the foreword, and we'll go on to chapter 1. We have skipped the introduction by Satsrup Maharaj because it's a recap of how he was given this assignment by the GBC and what occurred in the first 2 volumes. So we're starting now with volume 3, chapter 1, entitled Swami Invites the Hippies, January 16th, 1967. Now we remember that Srila Prabhupada, he had never gone on an airplane before. He came, it took a month, 37 days for Prabhupada to come by boat. from Calcutta to Boston, and then finally to New York. Now, for the first time, there was enough money because Mukunda sent him a ticket from San Francisco, so he was able to fly. And that flight from New York City to San Francisco, I flew once with Srila Prabhupada from New York to California. In those days, it took about 6 hours. As the United Airlines jet descended on the San Francisco Bay Area, Srila Prabhupada turned to his disciple Ranchor and said, "The buildings look like matchboxes." This is the way an airplane window looks. And you see the roofs of the houses look just like little red matchboxes. Just imagine how it looks from Krishna's viewpoint. Prabhupada would see everything in relationship to Krishna. Srila Prabhupada was 71 years old, and this had been his first air trip. Ranchor, 19, and dressed in a suit and tie, was supposed to be Srila Prabhupada's secretary. He was a new disciple, but had raised some money and had asked to fly to San Francisco with Prabhupada. So although he was a brand new devotee and didn't know much of the philosophy, because he was able to collect enough money, the devotees thought it would be a good idea that someone accompany Prabhupada on the flight. So he was allowed to go with Srila Prabhupada. During the trip, Srila Prabhupada had spoken little. He had been chanting, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. His right hand in his cloth bead bag, he had been fingering one bead after another as he chanted silently to himself. So this is one point that I would like to make to the audience, that Srila Prabhupada would chant his japa very quietly. You could not hear Srila Prabhupada chanting his japa. These loud machines that they now have of Prabhupada chanting japa have nothing to do with the way Srila Prabhupada chanted japa. Prabhupada gives the definition of japa in the Nectar of Devotion, written by Rupa Goswami, that one should chant their japa so that they can hear between the tongue and the ear. And that is how Srila Prabhupada chanted his japa. Very quietly so that only he could hear. And when other devotees would be chanting loudly, either he would ask them to chant more quietly, or he would ask them to go chant in another place. When the plane had first risen over New York City, he had looked out the window at the buildings growing smaller and smaller. Then the plane had entered the clouds, which to Srila Prabhupada had appeared like an ocean in the sky. So now, with Srila Prabhupada's first airplane trip, he would later use these analogies while describing Sri Krishna, because the sun is always in the sky. But when the clouds cover the sun, we who are underneath, we can't see the sun. So he would compare that to Krishna is always present, but when the clouds of Maya or illusion cover our vision, we can't see Krishna. We don't know that he's there, but he's there. So therefore, these clouds of illusion have to be eradicated by the chanting of Hare Krishna. He had been bothered by pressure blocking his ears and had mentioned it. Otherwise, he hadn't said much, but had only chanted Krishna's names over and over. Now, as the plane began its descent, he continued to chant, his voice slightly audible, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. And he looked out the window at the vista of thousands of matchbox houses and streets stretching in chartered patterns in every direction. So in the American airplanes, sometimes they'll have a movie playing At this time in the 60s and the 70s, you didn't have your own individual video screen at your window. There would just be one screen. And sometimes they would play Charlie Chaplin movies. And Prabhupada would watch these movies and laugh. And the other devotees who were with Prabhupada, they didn't know whether to watch or not to watch because Prabhupada was watching and really enjoying Charlie Chaplin. And he would use the examples of Charlie Chaplin sometimes in his lectures. One time Charlie Chaplin, he went to a ballroom dance and he had a tuxedo on with tails on the back. And he sat down on something that caused it was a wet bench or something with paint. The tails got broken off. So he didn't have tails like everybody else. But Charlie Chaplin, he made it seem like it's the new fashion. So he went dancing around without his tails, and then everyone started taking their tails off also. So Prabhupada explained that this is our fashion of Krishna consciousness, you know. And you see that has happened now. Now all these fashions, everyone's wearing the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra kurtas, and they have all these beautiful gopi skirts. Now it's become the fashion to look like a devotee. All over the world you'll find this. When the announcement for United Airlines Flight 21 from New York came over the public address system, this is down in the airport, the group of about 50 hippies gathered closer together in anticipation. For a moment, they appeared almost apprehensive, unsure of what to expect or what the Swami would be like. Now, this is a flyer that Mukunda made. This is a leaflet distributed in Haight-Ashbury prior to the Swami's arrival. So they made hundreds of these flyers, and they had the devotees like Govinda Dasi and her to-be husband, Gaur Sundar. They weren't yet initiated. They were just new visitors. Mukunda asked these new devotees to pass out these flyers so that as many people as possible would come to greet Prabhupada at the airport. Now this greeting of Prabhupada became such a sensation, they would take over the whole airport. There would be, not this time, but later, hundreds and hundreds of devotees waiting for Prabhupada, jumping up and down, dancing, throwing flowers all along the passageways as Prabhupada walked, and everyone just watching the whole escapade. So this is the first time now, and there were only about 50 people to greet Prabhupada. And most of them had never even met Prabhupada. Only Mukunda, Janaki, and a few other devotees who had also come from New York. They were there waiting. Like Haridas was there. You remember Haridas, Harvey Cohen. He was also there because he had moved to California, given Prabhupada his Bowery apartment to stay in, and now he was also greeting Prabhupada there. Roger Siegel. So Roger Siegel later became Guru Das, the husband of Jamuna. We were quite an assorted lot, even for the San Francisco airport. Mukunda was wearing a Merlin the Magician robe with paisley squares all around. Sam became Shamsundar, was wearing a Moroccan sheep robe with a hood. He even smelled like a sheep. Everyone had their hippie attire on, you know. And I was wearing a sort of blue homemade Japanese samurai robe with small white dots. Nobody quite knew what the standard was in those days, what to wear. Long strings of beads were everywhere. Buckskins were, I'm sorry to say, they were made out of leather, and they were shoes that people used to wear. That it was sewed together leather. Boots army fatigues, people wearing small round sunglasses, the whole phantasmagoria of San Francisco at its height. Remember, these were all hippies. Only a few people in the crowd knew Swamiji. Mukunda and his wife Janaki. Rabindra Sarup, he was one of the first disciples. He had moved to San Francisco. Rai Ram, he had also come, all from New York. And Allen Ginsberg was there. We know Allen Ginsberg helped Prabhupada a lot to propagate the chanting of Hare Krishna. Whenever he would have his big be-ins with hundreds and thousands of people to chant his poetry, he would start off with the chanting of Hare Krishna. He only knew one tune, but it was the holy name. And later he would ask Prabhupada that, Prabhupada, this is the only tune I know. Do you mind if I sing it? And Prabhupada he told him, it doesn't matter what the melody is, just so long as the Mahamantra is there. A few days before, Allen had been one of the leaders of the Human Be-In in Golden Gate Park, where over 200,000 had come together. 2 lakhs of hippies had all met in the Golden Gate Parkway for a big be-in. It was called a gathering of the tribes, for a joyful powwow and peace dance. So in America, we have Indian Americans, that's the Indian diaspora, and we have American Indians. The American Indians, they were the people who lived there before the Westerners came and colonized America. And they still lived there, but they were put away in reservations, and their culture was still there. So they would have different tribes, many different tribes of the American Indians, the Apaches, the Mohawks, all different kinds of names. And what the Westerners did was they took away their land and they put them on reservations where they were just like concentrated in one area. But they would still have their tribes and their peace dances, and they would have powwows, that's like ISKCON. And the culture was still there. Today, Allen was on hand to greet Swami Bhaktivedanta, whom he had met and chanted with several months before on New York's Lower East Side. So Mukunda, who's right behind Srila Prabhupada here, Mukunda now has grown his hair long and has a beard. He, of course, knew Allen Ginsberg from New York, because Allen Ginsberg used to come to 26 Second Avenue, and he asked Allen Ginsberg, please come to the airport to greet Srila Prabhupada. And he very happily did so. He brought flowers for Prabhupada, he led the chanting, and because he was coming, a lot of other people wanted to come too. Swamiji would be pleased, Mukunda reminded everyone, if they were all chanting Hare Krishna when he came through the gate. They were already familiar with the Hare Krishna mantra, because by that time Mukunda and Janaki and Sam and Melanie, they had already found a storefront, opened up a temple, they were distributing prasadam, they were feeding so many people, all these hippies who didn't have money, and they were chanting Hare Krishna with them as well. So it was these people that they came to the airport, and Mukunda was telling them, let's chant Hare Krishna to make Prabhupada happy. They had heard about the Swamis chanting in the park in New York, or they had seen the article about Swamiji and the chanting in the local underground paper, The Oracle. Because as soon as Mukunda opened up the temple, immediately the newspapers, they started writing articles that there's free food, there's chanting, there's dancing, and that also helped with bringing more people to the temple. Earlier today, they had gathered in Golden Gate Park. most of them responding to a flyer Mukunda had distributed, and had chanted there for more than an hour before coming to the airport in a caravan of cars. Now many of them, also in response to Mukunda's flyer, stood with incense and flowers in their hands. So we have here Allen Ginsberg at the Golden Gate Park, which is just a few blocks away from where the temple was. So it was very easy for the devotees to go and chant there, and also Prabhupada will go and chant there. We'll have pictures of that. And then from there, they got a whole crowd of people, and they got a lot of cars together. Everybody bundled into the cars together, and they all went to the airport together from Golden Gate Park. As the embarking passengers entered the terminal gate and walked up the ramp, they looked in amazement at the reception party of flower-bearing chanters. The chanters, however, gazed past these ordinary, tired-looking travelers, searching for that special person who was supposed to be on the plane. Suddenly, strolling toward them was the Swami, golden-complexioned, dressed in bright saffron robes. So, I'm sorry that none of you have ever been at an airport welcoming of Srila Prabhupada. It was one of the most ecstatic experiences you would have ever experienced in your whole life. Because when Prabhupada would walk out of that door, the whole airport would just go into ecstasy with the devotees falling down, jumping up, singing, dancing, flowers. It was just the most wonderful experience when Prabhupada would arrive at an airport. So here's the first time. Of course, they didn't quite know what to do. Mukunda was telling them, bring incense, bring flowers. They didn't know what to do with the things. But finally, the Swamiji emerged, and here's what happened. Prabhupada had heard the chanting even before he had entered the terminal, and he had begun to smile. He was happy and surprised. Glancing over the faces, he recognized only a few. Yet here were 50 people receiving him and chanting Hare Krishna without his having said a word. So this is the benefit of Srila Prabhupada training his disciples, then sending them out to open temples. Prabhupada just lightly suggested to Mukunda, when Mukunda told me he wanted to go to India, and he was going first to Oregon, which is near California, Mukunda just said to Prabhupada, you know, Prabhupada, it'd be a really good idea if we had a temple in San Francisco, because that's where all the hippies are. So when Prabhupada heard that, he said, well, why don't you go there and open a temple? And by the arrangement of Krishna, Mukunda canceled his whole India trip. He had a bad dream, he had a nightmare about India, turned in his ticket, and went with his friends and opened up the temple for Prabhupada. And Prabhupada, he didn't do it. He did it in the sense that he trained his disciples, and they did it. And this happened then like a chain reaction all over the world. Mukunda. We just had a look at Swamiji, and then we bowed down. Myself, my wife, and the friends I had brought, Sam and Marjorie. Her name was Melanie, not Marjorie. And then all of the young men and women there followed suit and all bowed down to Swamiji, just feeling very confident that it was the right and proper thing to do, right in the middle of the airport. The crowd of hippies had formed a line on each side of a narrow passage through which Swamiji would walk. As he passed among his new admirers, dozens of hands stretched out to offer him flowers and incense. He smiled, collecting the offerings in his hands, while Ranchar looked on. Allen Ginsberg stepped forward with a large bouquet of flowers, and Srila Prabhupada graciously accepted it. Then Prabhupada began offering the gifts back to all who reached out to receive them. He proceeded through the terminal, the crowd of young people walking beside him, chanting. So this used to become a daily ritual in our bigger temples, like for instance, Los Angeles. In the morning, Prabhupada will go out for his morning walk, and then when he would come back, everyone would be lined up on each side of the walkway, and they would hand Prabhupada a flower, and Prabhupada, from someone else's flower, he would hand them back a flower. And in that way, there would be an exchange between each one of the devotees every morning before Prabhupada would go into the temple to take class. So this is the first time it happened. They gave Prabhupada flowers, and then Prabhupada gave back the flowers as he walked through the passageway of all the people. At the baggage claim, Srila Prabhupada waited for a moment, his eyes taking in everyone around him. Lifting his open palms, he beckoned everyone to chant louder, and the group burst into renewed chanting, with Prabhupada standing in their midst, softly clapping his hands and singing Hare Krishna. Gracefully, he then raised his arms above his head and began to dance, stepping and swaying from side to side. You can imagine the people in the airport seeing something like this for the first time. So this is why Dr. Judah was very interested in finding out about Srila Prabhupada and the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, because no one had ever seen anything like this ever in America. To the mixed chagrin, amusement, and irresistible joy of the airport workers and passengers, the reception party stayed with Prabhupada until he got his luggage. Then they escorted him outside into the sunlight and into a waiting car, a black 1949 Cadillac Fleetwood. So Cadillacs are supposed to be luxury cars, but a 1949 luxury Cadillac was a bit of an antique. Prabhupada got into the back seat with Mukunda and Allen Ginsberg. Until the moment the car pulled away from the curb, Srila Prabhupada, still smiling, continued handing flowers to all those who had come to welcome him as he brought Krishna consciousness west. The Cadillac belonged to Harvey Cohen, that's Haridas, the one who painted the original Panchatattva painting. Harvey Cohen had first started coming to Prabhupada's lectures when he lived on 72nd Street, and he developed a very fatherly relationship with Srila Prabhupada. And that's why Harvey Cohen invited him to stay at his place at the Bowery. And now here was Harvey Cohen again in San Francisco, driving Prabhupada in his 1949 Cadillac, who almost a year before had allowed Prabhupada to stay in his Bowery loft. Harvey was driving, but because of his chauffeur's hat, he put it, one of the, like they wear these hats, the chauffeurs, picked up at a Salvation Army store. The Salvation Army we heard about in New York. The Salvation Army is an outlet of the Christian missions. And what happens is, in America, people, they're consumers. They buy a lot of things, much more than what they need. And as the fashions change, they don't know what to do with their old clothes, with their old furniture, with their all the different things that they buy that's in fashion. So they don't know what to do with it, so they donate it to the Salvation Army. Salvation means, salvation should mean liberation, but what they do is they salvage all of these things that are donated and they resell them to make money for the Christian missions. So the Salvation Army, they would collect money in the rich countries like America, and that money they would send to their missions. For instance, in India, there was a Salvation Army. And Prabhupada had made an arrangement with the Indian Salvation Army that he would give them rupees if they would give him dollars, because that was when he wanted to buy the temple on 70th Street. So Salvation Army, you can get all types of clothes and furniture and utensils at practically no money at all, very cheap, because the things were all donated. So Harvey picked up a chauffeur's hat at the Salvation Army. And his black suit and his beard. Prabhupada didn't recognize him. "Where's Harvey?" Prabhupada asked. "He's driving," Mukunda said. "Oh, is that you?" "I didn't recognize you." Harvey smiled. "Welcome to San Francisco, Swamiji." Srila Prabhupada was happy to be in another big Western city on behalf of his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and Lord Chaitanya. The further west one goes, Lord Chaitanya had said, the more materialistic the people. Okay, now this is a philosophy. The sun rises in the east, and the easternmost part of India is like Calcutta, Assam, places like that, right? And then as it travels, it goes further and further west, and the people become more and more degraded. So by the time it's on the other side of the globe, which is America, it's quite degraded. Then you go around to the other side of the globe, and where do you get to? China, which is considered the most degraded because of their eating habits and other things. They eat cockroaches, they eat all types of unspeakable things. So that's why it says here, the further west one goes, Lord Chaitanya had said, the more materialistic the people. So starting from India, going around, you have the most degraded on the furthest west. Prabhupada's godbrothers had often wondered about Lord Chaitanya's statement that one day the name of Krishna would be sung in every town and village. Perhaps that verse should be taken symbolically, they said. Otherwise, what could it mean, Krishna in every town? Well, now we know what that means, because the devotees are going everywhere. They've gone to the Antarctic, they've gone everywhere you can imagine, chanting Krishna's holy names, opening up temples, and turning people into devotees. But Srila Prabhupada had deep faith in that statement by Lord Chaitanya and in the instruction of his spiritual master. Here he was, in the far western city of San Francisco, and already people were chanting. They had enthusiastically received him with flowers and kirtan, and all over the world there were other cities much like this one. So this is another flyer. This is called Transcendental Airport Chant. This is to get the people to come to the airport. And then on either side, it has the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Greet Swami Bhaktivedanta on this return from the San Francisco Temple, sponsored by Allen Ginsberg and Krishna Consciousness. So, because there were young people and they had to, they didn't have, there were no computers, and there was no online anything, Google, none of those things existed before 1989 in the world. So they did everything by paper. So they distributed all these leaflets. And that's how people found out about Krishna consciousness. The temple Mukunda and his friends had obtained was on Frederick Street in the Haight-Ashbury district. Like the temple at 26 2nd Avenue in New York, it was a small storefront with a display window facing the street. A sign over the window read, Sri Sri Radha Krishna Temple, though there were no deities yet installed anywhere in the Western countries yet. Srila Prabhupada would soon start installing deities. Mukunda and his friends had also rented a 3-room apartment for Swamiji on the 3rd floor of the adjoining building. It was a small, bare, rundown apartment facing the street. So Prabhupada would sometimes look out of the window from his apartment, watching what the devotees were doing. And there's one wonderful story. I don't know if we'll read it in here, but it's in Shyam Sundar's book. Each day the milk truck would come to deliver milk to a store. And when the man went into the store to deliver the milk, Malati would come out, go into the milk truck, and walk out with whatever was needed for the temple. And Prabhupada from his window was watching one day. And later he asked her, what were you doing? And she said, well, I was taking what we needed because, you know, Krishna's also a butter thief. So I thought that... So this is a picture of Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada entering the Radha Krishna temple at 518 Frederick Street. Followed by several carloads of devotees and curious seekers, Srila Prabhupada arrived at 518 Frederick Street and entered the storefront, which was decorated only by a few madras cloths on the wall. Taking his seat on a cushion, he led a kirtan and then spoke, inviting everyone to take up Krishna consciousness. After his lecture, he left the storefront and walked next door and up the 2 flights of stairs to his apartment. So you can see here, Prabhupada's at the lectern, his Bhagavatams are there, and this might be a later picture because there are a lot of pictures on the wall. We have Jamuna sitting just in front of him, and then over to that side, that's another devotee. She joined when she was very young. Her name became Sharadiya. She and her brother joined. Her brother became Krishna Das. And Prabhupada told Krishna Das that he was the incarnation of Krishna's flute. And Sharadiya was a painter, so she would paint for Prabhupada. And she and her husband, they went to Haiti or Trinidad, one of the Caribbean islands, to open a temple after they were married. So these early devotees were really the pioneers of Krishna consciousness who Prabhupada sent all over the world to open up temples. Especially, there were 3 sets of grihastas. That was Mukunda and Janaki, and then Jamuna and Gurudas, and Shyamsundar and Malati, and their baby, Saraswati. So they went to London, and then they came here to India, and they traveled with Prabhupada for 2 years here, all over India. And then specifically, Gurudas and Jamuna were assigned to open our Vrindavan temple. He was our temple president here. And they continued in their Krishna consciousness till now. Of course, Jamuna has left this world, but Gurudas is still traveling and preaching. He took sannyas. He also went to Poland while it was still communist and was preaching there. So these early devotees, we'll see what Prabhupada says about them. They were the real foundation of our Krishna Consciousness Society, who opened temples all over the world for Prabhupada. As he entered his apartment, number 32, he was followed not only by his devotees and admirers, but also by reporters from San Francisco's main newspapers, the Chronicle and the Examiner. While some devotees cooked his lunch and Rancher unpacked his suitcase, Swamiji talked with the reporters who sat on the floor taking notes on their pads. So as usual, there wasn't much furniture. Furniture was considered to be Maya. We wouldn't have furniture. And you'll see here, this is a little later, because we don't have too many pictures that fit exactly what's being said here. But on the wall by Prabhupada where he's sitting is an advertisement for the upcoming Rath Yatra. Reporter: downstairs you said you were inviting everyone to Krishna consciousness. Does that include the Haight-Ashbury Bohemians and Beatniks? Prabhupada: yes, everyone, including you or anybody else. Be he or she what is called an acid head? So Prabhupada was learning the jargon of the hippies. Or a hippie, or something else. But once he is accepted for training, he becomes something else from what he had been before. Prabhupada: there are 4 prerequisites. I do not allow my students to keep girlfriends. I prohibit all kinds of intoxicants, including coffee, tea, and cigarettes. I prohibit meat eating, and I prohibit my students from taking part in gambling. Reporter: do these shall not commandments extend to the use of LSD, marijuana, and other narcotics? Prabhupada: I consider LSD to be an intoxicant. I do not allow any one of my students to use that or any intoxicant. I train my students to rise early in the morning, to take a bath early in the day, and to attend prayer meetings 3 times a day. Our sect is one of austerity. It is the science of God. Now, imagine Dr. Judah, who is a professor of religions, how he could try to understand that these hippies who followed absolutely no rules and regulations in their life, just by Srila Prabhupada's telling them to give up all of these sinful activities, they gave it up. This is why Dr. Judah was so interested in understanding Srila Prabhupada. And they made a very loving bond together because Dr. Judah appreciated Prabhupada so much. He saw that Prabhupada was actually saving these young people from a hellish condition of life. And what was that? Prabhupada was instructing them: no intoxication, no illicit sex, no meeting, no gambling. And just out of love for him, they gave it all up. Although Prabhupada had found that reporters generally did not report his philosophy, he took the opportunity to preach Krishna consciousness. Even if the reporters didn't want to delve into the philosophy, his followers did. So this is Prabhupada speaking. The big mistake of modern civilization, Srila Prabhupada continued, is to encroach upon others' property as though it were one's own. So if we analyze all of the wars that are going on right now, or any time in history, that is exactly what the cause of all dissension is. Encroach upon others' property as though it were one's own. This creates an unnatural disturbance. God is the ultimate proprietor of everything in the universe. So they're thinking, this is my country, I want this part of this country, this part of this. Everything belongs to Krishna. He is the proprietor, and everything should be used in his service. When people know that God is the ultimate proprietor, the best friend of all living entities, and the object of all offerings and sacrifices, then there will be peace. So Prabhupada is giving the English summary of the sloka in Bhagavad-Gita that Prabhupada would call the peace formula. Bhoktaram yagya tapasam sarva loka maheshwaram suridam sarva bhutanam gyatva mam shantim richati. A person in full Krishna consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the Supreme Lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material miseries. So from this sloka, Srila Prabhupada translated it into a language that the reporters could understand. The reporters asked him about his background, and he told briefly about his coming from India and beginning in New York. After the reporters left, Prabhupada continued speaking to the young people in his room. Mukunda, who had allowed his hair and beard to grow, but who wore around his neck the strand of large red beads Swamiji had given him at initiation, introduced some of his friends and explained that they were all living together and that they wanted to help Swamiji present Krishna consciousness to the young people of San Francisco. So it's not very clear. This is Srila Prabhupada chanting at Golden Gate Park, and Mukunda is behind him with his hair and beards and his red japamala strung around his neck, because in those days the beads were very big that the devotees had strung, and they didn't have bead bags, so they would just wear them around their necks so they could chant anytime they were able to. Mukunda's wife Janaki asked Swamiji about his plane ride. He said it had been pleasant except for some pressure in his ears. The houses looked like matchboxes, he said, and with his thumb and forefinger he indicated the size of a matchbox. He leaned back against the wall and took off the garlands he had received that day, until only a beaded necklace, a common, inexpensive item with a small bell on it, remained hanging around his neck. Prabhupada held it, inspected the workmanship, and toyed with it. "This is special," he said, looking up, "because it was made with devotion." He continued to pay attention to the necklace, as if receiving it had been one of the most important events of the day. So sometimes the devotees, they wouldn't know what to offer Prabhupada. They would make something for Prabhupada. They would sew something for Prabhupada. I remember the first thing that I gave to Prabhupada, I sewed him a bead bag. We all want to give something to Prabhupada that we hope would be of some value or that he would cherish it in some way. So someone had given Prabhupada a beaded necklace with a little bell on the bottom. And Prabhupada was appreciating it just because it was given with devotion and it was also made with devotion. When his lunch arrived, he distributed some to everyone, and then Ranchor efficiently, though tactlessly, asked everyone to leave and give the Swami a little time to eat and rest. Outside the apartment and in the storefront below, the talk was of Swamiji. No one had been disappointed. Everything Mukunda had been telling them about him was true. They particularly enjoyed how he had talked about seeing everything from Krishna's viewpoint. So Prabhupada was entering into their hearts. They were becoming attached to him. And soon, Prabhupada's foremost disciples would be coming out of this one small temple. That night on television, Swamiji's arrival was covered on the 11 o'clock news. And the next day, it appeared in the newspapers. So in America, there's a habit in those days, I don't know what's going on now, But after you finish your work, you have to work from 9 to 5, and then you have to commute to your house. It might take another hour, and then you have your dinner, and then you relax. Finally, before you go to sleep, you turn on the television and you watch the news. That's the last thing you see before you go to sleep. So that 11 o'clock news, everybody was just, everyone would watch the 11 o'clock news in America in those days. So they covered Prabhupada at his arrival. And the next day, it appeared in the newspapers. The Examiner's story was on page 2. Swami invites the hippies. So that was the title of this first chapter. Along with a photo of the temple filled with followers that's there. And then here's the article. And some shots of Swamiji, who looked very grave. Prabhupada had Mukunda read the article aloud. So if you like, I'll read that article before we finish tonight. Okay. A group of the Swami's disciples squat on the floor in his Frederick Street flat. His temple is open. Swami invites the hippies. In the middle of San Francisco's hippie land, a holy man from India today began establishing a new temple devoted to the science of God and the pursuit of world peace. I invite everyone in any condition of life to come with me along the path of learning Krishna consciousness, declared Swami A.C. Bhaktivedanta. Everyone, including the Haight-Ashbury Bohemians and beatniks, everyone, including you or anybody else, be he or she what is called an acid head or a hippie or something else, replied the 71-year-old Swami, who hastened to explain. Once he is accepted for training, he becomes something else from what he had been. Expounds. The lanky master of faith, attired in a flowing ankle-long robe and sitting cross-legged on a big mattress spread on the floor of an almost bare apartment at 518 Frederick Street, expounded the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. A few hours earlier, he had arrived from New York and was met at United Airlines Gate 22 by a group of his disciples monotonously chanting Hare Krishna Hare Ram, hailing the names of ancient Hindu gods. Many of the 50 greeters were of the long-haired, bearded, and sandaled set, each holding a length of incense and a flower offering as they squatted on the floor, swaying and clapping their hands in rhythm with the chants. Whoops. Uh-oh. Okay, thank you. In the Frederick Street apartment, the Swami, who migrated from India a year ago and last summer founded his first temple center in New York, termed his new sect a faith of austerity. He said there were 4 basic prerequisites for applicants seeking entry into his movement, enumerating them in these words: I do not allow my students to keep girlfriends. I prohibit all kinds of intoxicants, including coffee, tea, cigarettes. I prohibit meat eating, and I prohibit my students from taking part in gambling. Asked whether his shall not, so this is what we already heard, square virtues. He reported that some of his students and disciples in New York had given up drug usage before they could enter his International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Swami Bhaktivedanta stresses such square means mainstream, what the normal Americans follow. Square virtues as utmost cleanliness, religious belief, and sexual propriety. I train my students, he said, to rise early in the morning, that we already heard. Our movement is the science of God, he declared. The big mistake of modern civilization, he asserted, is to encroach upon others' property. So many of the things in this article were what Satsvarup Maharaj wrote in his, he just copied it over from this particular article. Okay, so we've gone over time. There's so much more, but we'll have to wait till next week. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.